morning and welcome to all of you. Today's hearing focuses on the challenges that America faces in meeting the increased demand for electricity, something that's gotten a lot of attention with good reason. Demand has been trending upward in recent years, and some expect it could grow by 25% just in the next 5 years alone. Data centers supporting artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, and the planned retirement of current production sources are just a few of the causes creating this increased demand. And as more people are drawn toward electric cars, that could put additional demand as well in play. America needs to put more electrons on the grid. We'll be hearing from 3 witnesses to better understand these issues today, and we're very fortunate to have them. They are, first, Peter Huntsman, the Chairman and CEO of Huntsman Corporation, Jeff Tench, the Executive Vice President of Vantage Data Centers, welcome, and finally, Rob Gramlich, the President of Grid Strategies. So thanks to all of you for being here. Now let's begin with a simple fact. America's electricity demand is surging. It's not creeping up, it's surging. For decades, power demand in this country remained relatively flat. Utilities planned for it, markets priced for it, regulators counted on it, but that era is over. We're now entering a new era of electrification. Data centers, AI computing, manufacturing, returning home, electric vehicles, all of it. Even conservative estimates suggest that we could see 2 to 3% annual growth compounded over the next decade. Now that number, 2 to 3% annually compounded, that might not sound like much, but it's like a two-way highway. It was built decades ago that's now expected to carry rush hour traffic to and from a major city every day of the year. More cars, bigger trucks, constant congestion. And if the road hasn't changed, but everything around it has changed, that's going to be an issue. Now it's a fairly decent analogy, something to help understand our power grid and the challenges now facing it. Now here's the real problem. We have spent much of the last 20 years shutting down the generation that can actually meet that demand. Coal plants retired, nuclear blocked, natural gas tied up in endless litigation. And we replaced a lot of that capacity with wind, solar, and batteries, resources that by design don't work all the time, work roughly a third of the time. 1/3 of the time, that's not enough to support the dispatchable baseload power that we got from the other sources I mentioned. These resources being non-dispatchable, it means that they cannot be dispatched at the exact moment that they're needed with predictability and the reliability that is required. They do not provide baseload power, and they do not build themselves. They require massive transmission overhauls, grid upgrades, and most importantly, in many circumstances, subsidies. So this isn't a free market. In many ways, it's a rigged one. The federal government has been investing heavily in certain green energy technologies for decades, handing out tax credits like candy. So naturally, developers follow these credits, and why wouldn't they? But what's the result? 95% of the projects waiting to connect to the grid happen to be wind, solar, and batteries, but only 10% of those ever make it online, onto the grid. Meanwhile, gas plants, nuclear reactors, geothermal, these things that can actually power a modern economy, providing predictable, reliable, affordable, clean baseload power, they get crowded out or delayed endlessly or blocked entirely. Why? Well, government red tape is responsible for a lot of it. And activist-funded lawsuits also have a fair amount to do with it, because a government that picks winners and losers and consistently picks losers creates a lot of this problem. Now look at what FERC tells us. According to FERC, between now and 2028, we're set to retire 24 gigawatts of coal-fired generation just in the next 3 years alone and replace it with just 5 gigawatts of gas-fired power. That math doesn't work. Not in theory, not in practice, not now, not then, not anywhere or at any time. The system was built for slow, steady growth. What we're facing now is a tidal wave. And if we don't change course, if we don't wake up to this reality, the lights are going out. We need utilities, developers, states, and Congress to start telling the truth about this. The grid is not ready. The system is not built for this. And the path that we're on will culminate quite predictably in rolling blackouts, rising prices, national vulnerability, and our inability to remain competitive in what many are describing as the AI global arms race. In fact, on only July 7th, the U.S. Energy Department warned that between the growth in demand and the retirement of some current sources, if we don't take steps to respond to the increased demand, the risk of blackouts in the United States will increase 100-fold. I repeat, increasing 100 times what we currently face in terms of blackouts across the country. We currently experience annual outage hours in the single digits, and if we don't take effective steps, the estimate is more than 800 outage hours per year in the next 5 years. We cannot allow that to happen. We've got too much riding on that. It's time that we face the facts, and that's what this hearing is about. And the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman Lee. Welcome to our witnesses, Mr. Gramlich, Mr. Huntsman, and Mr. Tench. As we'll discuss today, the scale and drivers of today's rising electricity demand are relatively unprecedented. It's not just that electricity demand is reaching record highs, it's that we're entering a new era of sustained load growth. The structural forces underlying today's load growth are converging. The growth of AI data centers, the electrification of vehicles, buildings, industry, as well as a resurgence in domestic manufacturing. And meeting this load growth will require structural changes to how we permit and build our energy infrastructure. In his testimony, Mr. Tench states that Vantage would prefer to source power from the grid, but that the system is out of sync. From interconnection timelines that are too long, transmission lines that take too long to build, and permitting that is too fragmented, the challenges that Mr. Tench articulates are the same ones that this committee has been trying to address for some time. As Mr. Tench notes in his testimony, no single business or technical workaround can substitute for a coordinated, modern, responsive grid. Fortunately, we sit on the committee that can help make that happen. The urgency isn't just about maintaining our edge in AI innovation. It's about affordability. As Mr. Gramlich points out in his testimony today, electricity bills are becoming unaffordable for too many Americans. And recent actions by President Trump and by the big bad bill will make this worse. The reconciliation bill alone is estimated to increase annual energy costs more than $16 billion in 2030 and more than $33 billion by 2035. This is because at a time when we need every single electron we can get, the reconciliation bill is causing many clean energy projects to be canceled. And the president's tariffs are driving up equipment costs, raising the cost of all energy generation resources, all of them. This is leading directly to Americans spending more on their utility bills. And on top of this, an aging electrical grid is causing many energy projects to be stalled for years in interconnection queues. In June 2025, Grid Strategies released a study that found that investing in well-planned, high-capacity transmission could save U.S. households between $6.3 and $10.4 billion annually, and that's even after accounting for the cost of actually building those transmission lines. The amount of energy currently in U.S. interconnection queues substantially exceeds the existing electricity demands, if only the grid could integrate it. According to the Energy Information Administration in 2024, the U.S. installed nearly 49 gigawatts of new grid capacity, 95% of which was for renewable resources. This year, the EIA estimates that developers will build 63 gigawatts of new capacity, including 32.5 gigawatts of new utility-scale solar, 7.7 gigawatts of wind power, 18.2 gigawatts of energy storage, and just 4.4 gigawatts of natural gas-fired generation. Clean energy is the most affordable, and it's the fastest type of energy generation to deploy, outpacing natural gas, which is facing years-long backlogs in turbine availability. If you order a gas combined cycle natural gas turbine today, you'll be lucky if it puts its first electron on the grid before 2032. Meanwhile, states like Texas and California are demonstrating that high levels of renewable energy do not compromise grid reliability. In fact, they improve it. After Texas added 9,600 megawatts of clean energy, including 5,400 megawatts of solar, 3,800 megawatts of energy storage, and 253 megawatts of wind, ERCOT CEO Pablo Vega said that the risk of grid emergencies dropped to less than 1%. That's down from 16% the previous year. NERC's 2025 Summer Reliability Assessment confirmed this trend, showing that the risk of rolling blackouts in Texas as battery deeply disturbed by the recent Department of Interior policy that requires Secretary Doug Burgum to personally review and sign off on wind and solar projects on federal lands. This nakedly political decision will risk delaying new generation additions to the grid when we need them the most. And consequently, it will drive up costs. According to the Department of Energy, federal lands in the contiguous United States could support more than 7,700 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. And with that said, I look forward to discussing how we can meet the rise in electricity demand and lower energy costs for households by integrating the most affordable and rapidly deployable energy resources today, while also investing in long-term modernization. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. We'll now hear from each of our witnesses. Giving you 5 minutes to make your opening statements. We'll hear first from Mr. Huntsman, then from Mr. Tench, and then from Mr. Gramlich. Mr. Huntsman, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, members of the committee, my name is Peter Huntsman, and I'm Chairman, President, Chief Executive Officer of Huntsman Corporation. For the first time in a generation, America faces an increase in electricity demand that will have far-reaching consequences if not managed appropriately by elected officials in both parties at federal, state, and local levels. This may sound like hyperbole, but it is not. Look no further than Germany, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe, and see how quickly great powers can implement policy to kill productive and thriving industries that form the backbone of modern economies. Just a decade ago, these nations were great industrial powerhouses. Today, they have the highest electricity prices in the industrialized world, shrinking economies, and factories being shuttered almost daily. Sadly, I've experienced this firsthand as our company has laid off thousands of employees in Europe. Facilities that were globally competitive just a few years ago have been closed and are no longer operating due to ruinous and unrealistic net zero and decarbonization policies, and the failed ideas that you can power a modern economy without developing oil and gas resources. In the chemical industry, we use large amounts of energy and electricity, take molecules mostly derived from oil and gas, break them apart, and then put them back together to make the physical building blocks of virtually everything you see, touch, and consume in modern life. Our entire supply chain employs millions of Americans and is mostly domestic-based. From transportation, technology, food supplies, medical equipment, building materials, pharma, and textiles, none of this would be possible without the chemical industry. None of it. Technology companies perform similar functions, taking energy and electricity to create data that enables every one of us to tap our mobile phones, by the way, another product that contains over 100 different chemicals, to build and access the world at our fingertips. Virtually every step in the tech world, from chip manufacturing to data generation, storage, transmission, computing, and consumer interface, use petrochemicals and enormous amounts of electricity to not just maintain, but to grow this vital industry. The advent of artificial intelligence is fast changing the face of modern society and global competitiveness. AI will bring an enormous wave of societal benefits similar to every past industrial and technological advancement. However, it is simply impossible for this to happen in a society that does not have the basic hydrocarbons to both construct the physical materials needed to build and the electricity required to power this great advancement. The challenge before us today is real, but the opportunities are even greater. The United States has both the raw material and the technological base to not just compete, but to continue to lead. Our greatest challenge will be to balance the enormous demand for more electricity while being able to keep prices affordable and supplies reliable for both consumers and industry, especially those who do not benefit from trillion-dollar balance sheets. If our growing demand for electricity being consumed by data centers and a growing tech industry are not met with additional reliable and affordable energy sources, we risk losing both our manufacturing and consumer affordability. It is simply impossible to build a modern industrial and technological economy on an energy base that is neither reliable or affordable. We can talk all we want to about nuclear ambitions that are decades away, or intermittent wind and solar dreams that are operable 25 to 40% of the time and require even greater investment in more reliable backup and unrealistic battery storage. But these dreams will never solve today's problems. The demand for power and raw materials are here today and growing tomorrow. If we continue to build out more tech industry consumption than production of electricity, while at the same time prohibiting the reliable and affordable production of largely hydrocarbon-based energy sources, we will look more like Europe and less like the continued model of growth that has made the United States the envy of the world. Senators, now's the time for ambitious and bipartisan planning that will allow the American industry, capital markets, and innovation to meet the needs of these exciting times and opportunities. Our company, our industry, and most importantly, the millions of people who rely on our operations look forward to being a part of the needed solutions and innovations that will be required for our continued success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Mr. Tench.
Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jeff Tench, and I serve as the Executive Vice President for North America and Asia Pacific Advantage Data Centers, a Colorado-based developer, owner, and operator of hyperscale data centers for leading U.S. technology companies. I'd like to briefly summarize my written remarks that have been submitted for the record. While I do not claim to be an expert on energy policy, I have spent my career building businesses and leading teams that construct and operate the most efficient, secure, and resilient large-scale digital infrastructure in the world. And I appear before you with one message based on what I have seen from my position. The greatest barrier we collectively face to our country's leadership on artificial intelligence today is timely access to reliable electric power. Demand for the AI and cloud infrastructure that Vantage provides is accelerating. Over the past decade, I have seen the scale and speed of hyperscale data center development grow dramatically. 5 years ago, a 30-megawatt facility was considered large. Today, 100 megawatts is the starting point, with campus developments commonly reaching 500 megawatts or more. And we have multiple customers seeking 1 gigawatt or more for AI infrastructure, which is the equivalent of all electrical power used here in Washington, D.C. In market after market across the U.S., our development teams all report the same issue. We cannot get the amount of electricity we need in the time frame to build our data centers. Without electrical power, it is not possible to build digital infrastructure, the infrastructure that supports AI, Data centers, transmission lines, generation facilities must scale rapidly if the U.S. is to remain the global leader in AI innovation. We are asking for your leadership to drive a more modernized policy framework that reflects today's growth, aligns with investment timelines, and ensures that the power system is ready when and where it is needed. From Vantage's perspective, the challenge is clear. We cannot access power on a timeline that aligns with customer demand. First, interconnection timelines are too long, both for new load and new generation resources. Second, we must develop new transmission for a more scalable and reliable grid. Third, permitting is fragmented and sequential, resulting in both increased costs and delays in projects that are otherwise ready to proceed. If we do not act decisively, we risk ceding AI leadership to countries that are moving faster to modernize their energy infrastructure. The United States is at a pivotal moment. The United States is looking at an AI era that is not coming, but is here. We have the capital, we have the customers and the talent, but we will not lead if we cannot power it. By prioritizing infrastructure for high-growth sectors, strengthening federal leadership, enforcing interconnection reforms, and incentivizing high-impact transmission, these policies can unlock the power system needed to support America's digital future. Vantage is prepared to invest and deliver. We bring development and operational expertise, capital, and long-term commitments to the communities where we build. Let us work together to build an energy delivery system that is ready to meet the scale and the importance of this moment. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience. I look forward to your questions and working together on solutions that can keep the United States at the forefront of digital infrastructure, innovation, and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tench. Mr. Gramlich.
Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Rob Gramlich. I'm founder and president of Grid Strategies. We're a power sector transmission and power markets consulting firm based here in the D.C. area. Thank you for doing this hearing. This is about one of the most important topics, I think, facing the country before one of the most, if not the most important, legislative committee. Power demand growth is sudden and significant, and it will be a challenge to meet. And affordability is equally important, as I'm sure you're hearing from your constituents. I'll focus now on how we can meet demand growth affordably. Basically, we need both transmission and generation. I'm going to start with transmission because that's the one that is largely in federal jurisdiction and has a federal role, while generation is largely reserved for the states under the Federal Power Act. Transmission is also the main thing we need right now. It has the highest impact. It's the great integrator of all resources. It may seem like it's a renewable energy piece of infrastructure, but that's just because over the last 5 years, that's all anybody was trying to connect to the grid. Right now, we're seeing a lot of other things trying to connect to the grid, including Jeff's data centers and data centers around the country, other large loads, manufacturing, and other types of generation. And whether it's nuclear, CCS, other types of generation, guess what? It's going to face that same constrained grid. So we should really focus on the grid. Transmission is also a great deal for consumers. The economies of scale are massive. There's a 75% discount if you do it at the higher voltage, like 765 kV lines, as opposed to 230, like 4 regions are doing. Transmission can also help in the 2020s. It's not just the 2030s or 2040s option. There are a lot of ways to expand transmission. Some lines are actually quick, and there are advanced transmission technologies and other ways to use existing corridors. Transmission supports reliability and resilience more than any other resource. The availability of transmission lines is 99.85% or above for all voltage classes, meaning it's much more available than any type of generation. With severe weather events in recent years, we've seen tens of gigawatts, like up to 10% of a region's power, served from large-scale movements of power across the regions of the country because of interregional transmission, which is why Congress directed the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, to study interregional transmission, which it did, and it found we have a need for 35 new gigawatts of interregional transmission. The U.S. is falling far behind competitors. China is doing 80 times what we're doing here on high voltage transmission. So I do think transmission really should be the bipartisan and the unifying force that commands Congress's attention. But in addition to transmission, we do certainly need to expand generation as well. There are three general types. There's sort of low-cost, plentiful energy. There's sort of the fast, flexible, the balancing type of generation, and then there is firm power. So I'm not saying all resources provide all of these things. We do need firm power to meet peak loads. Resources provide varying levels of contributions to meeting peak loads. Nuclear has the highest contribution at 95%, but we're not able to get much more very soon. Gas CTs, at least according to PJM, are around 60% in terms of their ability to serve peak loads. Combined cycle is a little higher in the 70s. Offshore wind is actually 69%. And so none of these resources are perfect, but the point is when you put them all together on the integrated grid, that's how you get nearly 100% reliability of the power system. By the way, flexible loads, flexible data centers and other loads will help alleviate the need for that capacity. The good news is we have two working processes in this country to get the generation we need. We have utility-owned planning, sort of regulatory planning under states, and we have some regions have markets. It's up to the state whether they want to be in a market or have planning. Turns out both are working. Older plants are staying online longer than anybody thought, and new plants are coming in, both in the integrated resource planning context and in the market context. Look at the PJM prices that came out yesterday. Markets are screaming for generation to either stay on or be added, and that's working. The interconnection queues do need some improvement to get those there. So in my final 20 seconds, what can Congress do here? I really would focus on transmission. I have some specific ideas in my testimony. Regional planning, like FERC Order 1920A. Interregional planning, like this committee's EPRA. By the way, congratulations on a bipartisan and decisive vote on EPRA last year. It had a lot of great ideas, and I hope that's a starting point for further bipartisan cooperation on legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gramlich. Okay, we'll now begin 5-minute rounds of questions, alternate between Republicans and Democrats. I'll lead off, followed by Senator Heinrich, and then we'll alternate between Republicans and Democrats in order of seniority, subject to the early bird arrival rule. Let's see, Mr. Tench, let's start with you. In comments filed in response to the AI Action Plan RFI issued by the White House, Vantage noted its development of an on-site utility-scale gas power plant in Virginia to power a data center in that region. Can you explain why Vantage decided to use gas for that on-site generation?
Well, the shortest answer is that we were left no choice. The planning cycles for our data center developments can sometimes span multiple years. And in this particular case, we were subject to a change in the demand algorithm from the local utility. It had been planning on having allocated to us 100 megawatts or MVA worth of power to power our data center project there in Loudoun County, when suddenly, after we were under construction, we were told that power was no longer available and would not be available for 5 to 7 years, at which point we had already committed hundreds of millions of dollars into the development project. So in this particular case, we were fortunate in the fact that our property sat on top of a high-volume, high-pressure natural gas line, and we scrambled, we designed, built, and commissioned a power plant operating completely independent of the grid within 18 months, and that data center is up and running with a very important customer of ours today.
Great, and I assume you didn't go with others for various reasons. Nuclear would have taken too long. Why not wind and solar?
Well, in this particular case, our option was only to be able to develop a power solution for that site that was not grid dependent at all.
Gotcha.
And that was the choice we made. People may refer to that as island mode, but it effectively has no connection to the public grid.
right? But wind and solar wouldn't provide the continuous.
Not in that particular case. It's, the parcel was only big enough to handle a turbine plant, and there would have been no way to bring in wind and solar in that particular case.
Gotcha. Mr. Huntsman, in testimony that you provided, I believe last year to the Senate Finance Committee, you argued that affordable, abundant, reliable energy is foundational to American manufacturing dominance. America has abundant resources like coal, gas, geothermal, in some cases hydroelectric. We also have expertise to build advanced nuclear, which I'm optimistic about as far as it becoming commercially viable in the coming years, assuming we can overcome the regulatory hurdles, which we're anxiously trying to do. Now, there's been some anti-growth forces, including environmental NGOs, that have helped capture many of our Fortune 500 companies. In some cases, big energy companies, in other cases, big tech companies, to endorse a net zero framework. Now, I believe a lot of corporate leaders know that such goals and commitments are impossible to achieve, not to mention they're harmful to the many of the very industries they represent. Can you elaborate on how these sustainability commitments harm energy affordability and reliability?
Well, so many of these commitments have a longer-term objective. We're going to be carbon-free by 2050 and so forth. You'd be shocked at the number of CEOs I've spoken to that have said, I don't have to worry about that. I won't be around. I can make the commitment today, but I'm not going to be around then. There is no viable path when you look at, on a global basis, when you look at just replacing hydrocarbons with renewables. Again, renewables have a very important role to play in certain areas, in certain fields. We make the raw materials that go into the wind blades and solar panels and so forth. I'm not anti any of that. I want to be very clear on that. But as far as they're reliable, the reason why you're building gas turbines is because you don't have the reliability. Nobody knows a week from today if wind turbines are going to be turning or not. Nobody knows exactly how much power you're going to be getting out of solar panels a week from today. They can tell you what you're going to be getting out of a gas turbine. So I'm more concerned about the today and how we get to the issues of today and how we get to the issues over the next 5 or 10 years, because that'll dictate where we are in 2040 and 2050. And coming up with unrealistic goals that we just hope that eventually we'll have some mechanism just isn't, it's not realistic. That's what we're seeing in Europe.
So they've got their place, certainly, and there are good things that can be accomplished with those. But some of those areas, including those areas that are growing fastest within our economy, things like AI data centers, you can't really rely on that because it doesn't provide baseload power. What would happen if you tried to do that, whether it's manufacturing or an AI data center that needs consistent baseload power? What would happen if you had to rely on something that's intermittent?
Well, you're shutting down. And facilities like ours, if they go down unexpectedly, they can take as long as 30 days to restart, costing tens of millions of dollars. So unexpected shutdowns, that's why I mentioned, I think 4 or 5 times in my oral testimony here, the word reliability.
Right.
And that's very key here.
Right. And some of the emerging nuclear technologies certainly hold a lot of promise in that area, offering zero emissions alternatives. Those are coming, not yet here, in a way that's commercially deployable. Okay, my time's expired. We'll go to Senator Heinrich.
Mr. Tench, you may be aware the Department of Interior recently released a memo that's going to require the Secretary to review all wind and solar projects on federal lands. It adds just one more layer of red tape. Do you have opinions on what the potential business impacts of energy projects just being delayed in that regulatory process, how that further delays impact the business prospect?
You know, our observation and our requirement is for more electrons, as you called out in your opening remarks. Vantage is relatively agnostic as to the source of those electrons. So in the case of rulemaking or regulatory action that slows down the process of approving new generation or new transmission would definitely be a negative for our business.
Should, in the sort of 5-year window, like 2025 to 2030, shouldn't we be focused on putting as many electrons agnostic of generation source on the grid as possible to be able to meet the kind of demand that you represent?
Yes, our position is that efforts to move electrons around through enhanced transmission is important, necessary, but insufficient relative to the overall demand. We need more energy.
More
on the grid.
generation and
We need more generation, and we need more transmission independent of source. That said, it does need to be a reliable, grid dispatchable source, which I believe, can be accomplished with the right combination of energy source for generation and energy storage.
And storage. One of my concerns is we have an existing pipeline that is the result of decisions that have been made over the course of the last decade. That pipeline is 95% clean energy plus storage. It's about 5% gas. A year or two ago, we had a couple of nuclear plants come online, which are great. I support that, but that's kind of a one-off. In the next 5 years, if we start building new nuclear today, whether that's SMRs or traditional light water reactors, that's going to take longer than the 5-year window. If I order a combined cycle natural gas turbine today, it's probably going to come on the grid in 2032, 2033 if we're lucky. So if you don't allow the existing projects that are in the queue today that are renewables plus storage, what does that do to the price pressure on the grid? What's the impact of that?
As it relates to price pressure, I'll probably defer to Rob on that question as more of a grid expert. But in the broader context, our goal are to encourage speed of change in regulatory process to bring more electrons on the grid. And again, depending upon the site in which we're developing, our access to proximate energy sources varies. And we are being very pragmatic about how we approach that and make available to ourselves whatever we can in order to meet the demand.
Mr. Gramlich, do you want to address the price pressure issue?
Sure. Basically, it's supply and demand. There's scarcity of generation. So anything that is limiting new generation from coming on, whether it's interconnection queues, permitting holdups at interior, or anything else, that's cutting off supply, and that is definitely raising prices. And
we're actually seeing prices go up as well.
We are seeing prices go up. Wholesale power prices are going up. That is required. Those higher costs are required to be incorporated by state public utility commissions into retail bills. So retail consumers /
Are there
voters
places where
more.
prices have actually come down in recent years that you can point to, and what was the reason why those prices came down?
Sure. Well, if you just look at, say, the supply stack for someplace like Texas, just over the last couple of days has had a majority of their peak demands, not just, overnight, not just winter, peak afternoon air conditioning driven demand served by a majority renewables plus storage.
And were there rolling blackouts?
There were not. Reliability
Has reliability gone
is
up
better. Yeah, you probably heard about rolling blackouts in California like 5 years ago. Honestly, they got behind on resource adequacy, but what did they do? They built a lot of solar and batteries. So same dynamic there. I'm sure we're seeing a majority renewable energy any hour now. It's going to kick in, and then when the air conditioning load this afternoon is high, there's going to be solar, and then the sun will set. Air conditioning load will still be high, but the batteries will then kick in and serve through the evening. So again, they don't do everything.
One last question, because I'm running out of time here, Mr. Gramlich. What could we do as the Congress to improve the interconnection queue process? Because that's preventing a lot of resources, a lot of electrons from getting on the grid in a timely way to meet the kind of demand that Mr. Tench represents.
Yeah, so FERC has been working on interconnection queues, and each RTO is kind of doing it in their own way. I think there's some great models like the Southwest Power Pool, where it's more just a simple entry fee. You pay it, you get in, and you don't have to do a 4-year-long study. Congress could encourage things like that, encourage FERC to undertake activities like that. You have probably a couple of nominees coming before this committee pretty soon. You could ask them about that.
I will.
We will now turn to our colleague from Mississippi, Senator Hyde Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to all of our witnesses that have come to share your testimonies. It's great to have the resource that we have to you, and I appreciate your willingness to do that. My question is going to be directed to Mr. Tench. You mentioned in your testimony that Vantage prefers to connect to the grid for power, obviously, but there may be a need to deploy outside generation at the start of the project, which makes sense. And as you point out, beyond company building schedules, adding to the grid can take a long time. It can take years, and usually taking around 5 years for the most traditional baseload power that you're looking at there. What short-term solutions has Vantage explored for initial builds, and do you think other companies would follow a similar pattern, waiting to connect to the grid?
In the case of Vantage, we have, coming out of the experience I described in Virginia, been far more planful in terms of the expectations of our delays as it relates to the interconnection that we apply for to receive load from the grid. And the form that has taken, for the most part, has been in investing in a supply chain of turbines and reciprocating natural gas engines, which we increasingly plan to deploy in a mobile setting so that we can deploy them on trailers for, let's say, 2 years, 3 years until we can get the interconnection from the grid. And that's proven to be an important part, but only one part of our overall plan for how we make our way through the wait, if you will, as it relates to the electrons that we need.
And you think other companies may follow a similar pattern to that?
Well, I think that'd be up to them, but certainly for us, we found it to be a way of reducing our risk and smoothing out the gaps in availability.
And from a connectivity standpoint, what would Vantage's plan be once utilities meet electrical generation demand, once you get there?
Well, our plan would be to connect to the grid and operate according to the regulations that exist in any of those states in terms of having a firm commitment from the utility through an electrical services agreement. And then we would use that as our primary source of power to our data centers, coupled with emergency generation backup, which we deploy in most of our sites as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is an important panel, and let me begin by saying I don't believe we got in this predicament by osmosis. The fact is the Republicans have been doing favors for their big oil buddies at the consumer's expense, and that is why, a major reason why, energy bills are going through the roof. And I'm just going to take a minute to look backward and then talk about where we ought to be going. We had 50 years worth of gridlock on climate. No pricing, no regulatory reform, no nothing. In the Senate Finance Committee, we put together an alternative, and it was based on markets. It was based on technology neutrality. Underline those words, technology neutrality. Everybody's part of the market. You get choices. And the more you reduce carbon, the bigger your tax savings. And in a couple of years, we got hundreds of billions of dollars committed to making sure that we had those renewable choices. Now, along come the Senate Republicans, particularly in the last couple of weeks. And when the natural gas folks, these are not the environmentalists, these are the natural gas folks, basically said, we'll take electrons if they're from Mars. We've got to have electrons. We'll take them from anywhere, not just because of AI, but because of growth, because of innovation. And regrettably, the Senate Republicans said, we're not for choices. We're not for options. We're not for alternatives. And of course, that doesn't let us meet the challenge of demand. So my view is, and what I'm going to keep pushing for as a senior Democrat in the Finance Committee, is working with anybody across the political spectrum to get us more choices. And particularly, as my colleague from New Mexico said, the gas industry, not the League of Conservation Voters or the Sierra Club, will tell you that the cheapest alternatives now are solar and wind, and they need them today, not tomorrow. They need them today in order to drive markets. So apropos of your good work, Mr. Gramlich, I'd be interested in what your ideas are to kind of resurrect a choice-based system rather than one that just hands out the goodies to the big oil companies. And by the way, people tell me, you all are welcome to add this, fossil fuels cannot meet our demand today. If we're going to meet demand, we need solar and wind. We need these alternatives. And after 50 years of gridlock on this issue, we broke up the inertia, we broke up the lack of progress, and we were making a lot of progress. And I want to see us get back to something that has as many of those choices, the technological neutrality principles that we wrote in the Finance Committee, because I think that is America's energy future. And by the way, nobody knows what the big alternatives are going to be 30 years from now. We need a science-driven kind of approach. And when we talked to Joe Manchin about putting this together, which he backed, he said, we need more science. And we'll get that with the technology-driven kind of system. So tell us about what you'd be working on in terms of more choices for the days ahead.
Well, Senator Wyden, thank you for your leadership on the technology-neutral tax credit. I think that's a perfect example of something that provides the support to any and all technologies that meet the performance standards that Congress can set out. And so I thought that was a great idea. Glad to see it enacted. Sad to see the early phase out. I think at this point it's important for Treasury to implement at least what Congress passed recently.
So you want to make sure that there's no more stalling around, because as you know, we got a modest bit of the current system into the final bill, and now it looks like a bunch of people in the House are trying to roll that back. You tell the administration, suck it up here and stand in there for choices and alternatives. Is that one of your messages?
Certainty is critical for investment, and uncertain IRS regulations kill certainty. You can't invest if you don't know what the rules are.
What else would you do? More choices.
Well, I think, generally, as I was saying before, the transmission grid really is in the purview of this committee and Congress and FERC, and that is the great integrator of all resources that enables choice of whatever a state may choose, and
Good.
generation is largely...
My time is up. That was the one thing that we weren't able to get in the 2022 election. And had we been able to negotiate a compromise with more choices, I would have put transmission number one as our challenge for the future. And we're going to try to get those choices back, and we're interested in working with you on transmission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. We'll go next to Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, for all three of you, for being here. In many ways, Nevada has really led the way in developing new energy capacity over the last several years. And quite honestly, with the help of the tax credits and the Inflation Reduction Act, Nevada was able to attract new businesses hoping to use our natural resources, one of them being solar, geothermal, in the great state. I assume that's one of the reasons, Mr. Tench, you were there. And I am excited to hear that not only has Vantage has pushed for new data centers to be sustainable by design, you're including an AI campus in Nevada, which was announced July 15th, that also seeks to use a closed-loop chiller system to minimize the need for large volumes of water, again, in the West where there's a lot of drought. Can you talk a little bit about why renewables are important, depending on the region where your data center is, and are you using a renewable source for this data center and the AI in Nevada?
Yes, we are, as you know, developing a substantial AI-focused campus in Trick, just outside of Reno. Mm-hmm. And the selection of that location was driven by a number of factors, including its proximity to the West Coast as an alternative to California, where things can get pretty expensive and pretty hard to do. At the same time, the mix of energy sources that were available to us through Nevada Power included, as you noted, their prior investments in solar in particular. And for Vantage, for our customers, again, we prefer to use grid and the combination of total cost of ownership, the ease of doing business in Nevada, and the physical location conspired to make it a great location for this deployment.
Thank you. Mr. Gromlich, you've outlined some of the challenges contributing to increased electricity bills across the country. In addition to severe weather and electric equipment constraints, you listed the uncertainty surrounding the current administration's tariff policy and the Republicans' termination of the tax credits. A recent Bloomberg government article stated that when fewer renewables meet more expensive gas and explosive demand from data centers, an upward pressure on rates is the predictable result. Some estimates suggest that electricity bills in parts of the country could jump as much as 60% to 350% over the next decade. My question is to you is, can you summarize current market considerations and why U.S. grid operators are not in a position to turn away renewable electrons?
Yes, grid operators are, they need all the power they can get. And as I've said, not all resources do all of the functions, right? So we do need firm power. And by the way, the geothermal in your state is providing excellent, clean, firm power. And I really am hopeful about geothermal going in many more states to provide that clean, firm power. But the grid operators do depend on it. And in terms of affordability, it's supply and demand. If we take any of these resources out of the mix, that just leads to higher wholesale prices, and those necessarily move down into retail customers' electric utility bills.
And shouldn't the states, working with the private sector, basically determine what that energy mix or that portfolio should be based on their geography, based on their opportunities there? I mean, we have geothermal, we have solar, we have wind, we have battery storage, we have natural gas. That's different than my colleague here sitting to me to the left from Maine. So shouldn't it be driven by that need based on the states, where their region is, what the private sector is wanting to build there? Does that make sense?
I think that's exactly right. Well, that's the structure of the Federal Power Act that you all oversee on this committee and its implementation at FERC. Generation is largely in the purview of states. I mean, it's kind of a states' rights issue. And so this kind of micromanaging of individual power plant dispatch through things like Department of Energy emergency orders or, specific targeting of projects for not getting permitting at an interior, that's really micromanaging from the federal level, something that really is the state's job to address.
And if we are going to compete with other countries like China and others and grow out our grid and our transmission and really invest in it, that micromanagement should not occur. It really should be driven from the states, the private sector on, correct?
That's right. And I mean, the reality is we have a very diverse electric industry structure. Your state has one structure. It's very different in Maine and other states. And so each state uses markets or regulation or various combinations of investor-owned and other types of utilities to meet their power demand needs. And that's where the process should take place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The word transmission has come up numerous times today, and how important it is, and what a great important part it is of this discussion. Unfortunately, this morning, the Department of Energy terminated a loan program for a major interregional transmission system in the Midwest. So here we are talking about how important transmission is, and here's the Department of Energy, and it wasn't a grant; it was a loan guarantee program. I just think it's the timing is somewhat ironic. We all know that the solar and wind are intermittent. We understand that. Everybody knows that. I was in the hydro business. That's also intermittent. It doesn't always rain. as well as wind and biomass and large-scale conservation. So, but what's really happening is really dramatic in terms of energy storage. If you have adequate energy storage, solar and wind are baseload because you have something to make up the difference. And I used AI in your honor, Mr. Tench, check on where we are in batteries as of 5 minutes ago. The U.S. added a record 10.4 gigawatts of utility-scale battery storage in 2024, marking a 66% increase from the prior year. In 2025, the EIA anticipates a record-setting year with another 18 gigawatts of utility-scale battery storage on the grid. Looking ahead, the EIA forecasts that U.S. utility-scale battery storage will nearly double, reaching 65 gigawatts by the end of 2026. In other words, the battery industry is no longer a fantasy or a distant dream. It's happening right now on a very substantial scale. And as you point out, Mr. Graham, it saved the day in Texas and in California, and it's already working, the idea of the integration of batteries with solar and wind. Let me talk for a minute, though, about transportation. Mr. Graham, this is what worries me. It used to be an electric bill in Maine was 25% transmission and distribution and 75% source of energy. It's now about 50-50, and transmission is getting more and more expensive. Everybody knows we have to rebuild the grid. My concern is it's going to be done in an expensive way that's going to add dramatically to ratepayers' costs. Mr. Graham, you're nodding. I take it you agree. The record doesn't show nodding.
Absolutely. We are doing transmission in sometimes the most expensive way possible now, and we could change that.
Well, one way to change it is reconductoring. Here is a conventional electric line, high-tension conductor. Here is a carbon fiber-based conductor. This little guy will carry twice the energy as this one. So if we put these on the grid, we don't need to change all the poles, the right-of-ways, all of that kind of thing, and we can get a significant amount of additional throughput in the grid at a fraction of the cost of rebuilding the whole system. The same with, you're familiar with the term GETS, the various technologies that enable the grid to be managed more efficiently in terms of temperature and load and all those kinds of things. The estimates I've seen is that reconductoring and GETS could increase throughput on the grid by something like 40% at a fraction of the cost of rebuilding. My concern is that the rate-based model encourages utilities to build rather than to reconductor or use GETS. Mr. Gramick, talk to me about how we solve that problem. How do we provide incentives for those who will be rebuilding the grid to do so in the most cost-effective way and to minimize the effect on the ratepayers?
Yes, well, and I would note that cable that you're holding is manufactured near Los Angeles, but unfortunately 90% of that company's sales go to other countries which are deploying advanced conductors and grid-enhancing technologies in far greater levels than we are here.
Is that partially because there's no incentive on our utilities to use this kind of technology?
I think that's generally right. I think a lot of utilities are actually looking at them now, but we need to get beyond pilot stage to make it more systematic.
And another factor we haven't talked about is demand response. That is the ability of customers to modify their demand load in terms of what's on the grid. Is that a promising technology?
That's a very promising technology, and it's not just sort of the peak hour, but think about flexible data centers. Sometimes there's just some grid contingency that might happen once every 3 years, and if they can just curtail a little bit at that time, then we can integrate a lot more data centers without having to rely on the full network capacity, which takes so long to serve that data center. So that type of flexibility is critical.
And I should point out, I know I've run out of time, solar and wind today are A, the cheapest, and B, the quickest to deploy. And I'm worried that, as the Vice Chairman has said, there's a 5 to 7 year lag in new grid-scale gas turbines. We can't give China a 5 to 7 year head start in AI. And we've got to be timely as well as control costs. So thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. This is a fascinating subject, really, to dig into. I have to tell you, in recent years, as I've sat in this committee, we've had the people come in here and predict to us what was going to happen as far as demand for electricity in America because of AI and the other things that are coming on board, particularly AI. And I have to tell you, I was a doubter at the beginning, but the further we go, the more obvious it's become that we're going to be inundated with demand for electricity here in the next recent years. It's a problem, but the good news is that this particular problem we know how to deal with, and that is we know how to generate electricity. We in Idaho in 1951 demonstrated for the first time that nuclear energy could be used to create electricity, and we've been at it ever since. Of course, we had the setback as a result of 3 Mile Island, but which really put us a generation behind. But now, I think the world knows there's a real renaissance going on as far as nuclear energy is concerned, not only in the United States, but also particularly in the globe, particularly in Eastern Europe, where they're trying to cut the cord with Russia. So I guess I'd like to get your thoughts on this. We're going to flip the switch, hopefully, in the next year or so on the first SMR, which is really going to change the delivery of electricity in the world. And this August, we're going to cut the ribbon on a micro reactor that they're starting at the INL in Idaho. We're very proud of the work we do in Idaho on nuclear. We really think that we have the solution to all of this. I really think that nuclear is going to have to be and I agree that we want to be all of the above, but I think to deliver the load, I really think it's going to take nuclear to do that. And I'd like to get each of your thoughts on that. Peter, good to see you again, and your thoughts first, please.
I believe that nuclear eventually will be able to fill that base load, but look, I just want to be honest with you. I'm the only one sitting here at this table that pays a power bill of over $250 million a year. That's my gas and electric bill in my company. We can talk all we want about all these renewables and so forth and solar and wind. The fact of the matter is it is failing in Europe where it has been implemented on widespread basis. It is failing. And the prices are going up through the roof. We can't afford it. We're shutting down facilities. We're laying off people. And we talk about these especially in the state of Texas. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year manufacturing the state of Texas. State of Texas, this entire base load is natural gas and nuclear and petroleum-based projects. The incremental piece that is renewable is wonderful. Again, I'm not opposed to that. But without the base load, we couldn't afford to buy electricity in Texas. And the only way we're able to compete today is because of the base that we have of a hydrocarbon-based energy source. And that is just the reality of all this. Eventually, somebody's got to pay for all this stuff.
Well, the fact that the utilities now are really kindling a lot of interest in nuclear, does that give you any solace going forward?
Not a great deal. I don't personally. I'm very concerned about where a lot of this stuff is going. When I see how much of this is renewable coming out, for every windmill that is built, again, this is our product, but for every windmill that's built, you've got to build a backup to it because 70% of the time, it's not going to be turning. So you've got to have a backup. Most of the time it's going to be idle. So therefore, I'm paying for 2 systems. If I've got wind, solar, and backup, I'm paying for 3 systems.
Not a problem with nuclear.
Not a problem with nuclear, no. But again, I think we're probably 10 plus years away from having mass scale nuclear power.
Mr. Tage.
As I think about our fleet across the United States, we're fortunate to be operating data centers in places where part of the grid power we take down is nuclear. We are big proponents of further investment and acceleration of nuclear power, both at as a complement to the entire grid, as well as some of the emerging technologies around SMR. I hope you're right about in the next couple of years us seeing the first commercially viable solution for that. But I think nuclear is absolutely a big part of the solution here.
Mr. Gremley?
Yes, I've not seen a change in public perception about a technology ever as much as we have with nuclear, which because so many people motivated by the climate crisis want clean power. And I think everybody who's looking at the grid also realizes we do need firm power. So that is a clean, firm source that could make a great contribution.
Well, take heart. Idaho's here to help you. We got the SMR that we've developed there and moving forward, and we're really excited about the micro that's coming. Those two things are just going to change the world, I think, as they develop them and as they prove them out in the marketplace and as they interest utilities in being able to get what will be a new wave, I think, of how they produce nuclear energy. My time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tench, let me start with you. I think we all agree that we agree with you that we've got to win the AI race. And it's not just our economic future, it's our national security is at stake there. In your testimony, you highlighted the importance of high voltage transmission, noting that enabling the transfer of electricity between operational costs for data centers and other large users. Without action from this administration and from this Congress to accelerate high voltage transmission development, will the U.S. stay globally competitive in the AI race?
You bet. You bet.
I don't think we can say definitively that without interregional transmission, we will fail to be globally competitive. What I can say is that our ability to move electrons seamlessly across this country in between these regions is critical, freeing up access to power where it's needed. And it allows us to build the data centers that contain the AI that we're all scrambling for here in terms of being able to stay competitive. So it is one part and an important part, I think, of a change we can make in order to make better use of the grid that we have, but it is not in and of itself sufficient to avoid the outcome you're describing.
But let me rephrase it then. Would you agree that the probability of our losing ground in the race towards AI, the probability that we're going to lose ground increases if we don't address this issue within the grid?
Yes.
Good. And would you believe that any bipartisan or administration-led permitting reforms aimed at supporting data centers should also include some of these ambitious reforms to building that high voltage transmission?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
Great. Mr. Gramlich, studies show that high voltage transmission improves reliability and affordability, yet in the U.S. we've only built 3,238 miles of high voltage transmission from 2017 to 2024. Experts say we should be building 5,000 a year. So that means we should have built 35,000 and we built less than 3,500. On a variety of not be able to match. In 2023, Congress directed NERC to study U.S. transmission needs. The Commission found we may need 35 gigawatts of additional interregional capacity just to ensure reliability. So, Mr. Gramlich, can you explain in layman's terms the value of interregional transmission in terms of affordability and reliability?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. It's absolutely true that interregional transmission is one of the best ways to improve reliability and resilience. We sometimes see 10% of a region's power served by the large-scale movement of power across the country over that interregional transmission network. Unfortunately, none of us inherited a power system that is very conducive to that, with thousands of little vertical silos of utilities that don't have those horizontal connections, and our regulatory structure is only trying to catch up to that. So your work through EPRA and other efforts, other bills that you have introduced on interregional
direct a question, well, to any of the three of you, in terms of the ensuring that our federal policies are not in a position where we are picking the winners and the losers. And I grant you, wind and solar have been the, quote, mature technologies for a long time. But we're now in a place where the Secretary of Energy, his deputy, are going to be spending a lot of their time over at DOI with a review of every individual wind and solar decision that comes before the department. They got a lot to do. They've got a lot to do. I think that this is going to be distracting and taking away the time that they need to be working on some of the issues that all three of you have mentioned here this morning. Any comment on that? I've run my full 5 minutes, so that's not very fair to you, but go ahead.
Oh, real quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I would just say to the extent that it adds cost to consumers, I hope they take a long time in reviewing those projects, because there are a lot of companies out there that, and a lot of consumers that just can't afford these redundant systems and the higher costs to all of them. And I think we're losing focus here when a Tier 4 data center comes online, 99.997. That means they're out of electricity. An Amazon center can be out of electricity like 27 minutes per year. They're not going to be relying on wind. They're not going to be relying on solar. That may be part of their system, a very small part of it, but for the most part, it's why they're looking to buy nuclear facilities and so forth. And it's the consumers that's going to get caught up with this higher pricing, and it's companies like ours that's going to get caught up with this higher pricing. So I'm concerned about a lot of this.
No, I hear you. I just want to add one final point to this. I'm dealing with communities, though, that if they can get 20% of their diesel-powered consumption offset by some incremental wind and solar, it's 20% that they're not spending.
Totally
so
right.
We're operating in different worlds. I get that. I get your point, and I just need to make sure that you understand what it means in some of these really remote, off-the-grid places. Mr. Garland.
Well, I would just thank you for your leadership on the permitting issue, not just this review, which seems awfully inefficient and could take whole generation types off the table, but on the staffing. Many of these permitting agencies for your state and others have great staff, but they need to be staffed up. They're trying to get permits issued, but they're trying to do it in a legally sustainable way. And if we lose staff at these permitting agencies, that's a real challenge for any of the infrastructure we're trying to build.
You made the comment a minute ago that it's not a job to pick winners and losers. I agree. We're in our business, we're simply trying to deliver for our customers the technology and the buildings and the infrastructure to drive the deployment of AI, the grid. And as we receive electrons off of it, doesn't know what the source was. We have requirements in terms of availability. We have backup generation for those times when there is a problem with the grid. But look, anything we can do to encourage as many different sources of power to increase the total load that's available, along with the transmission of that load, I think is a good idea.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. We'll now begin a second round of questions under the same terms as the original one. Mr. Huntsman, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. One big tech company recently released its sustainability report sometime last week. And it shows that company's carbon emissions rose by 6% last year in 2024, primarily due to the development of data centers and electricity consumption that goes along with that and other activities. Now, despite the rhetoric from some big tech companies and others about net zero, the reality is that their business model, particularly the business model of those that are heavily reliant on big data centers, requires reliable power, affordable power, and oftentimes natural gas is the best option. In many cases, it is effectively the only realistic option. Can you discuss how Huntsman Corporation focuses more on innovation than sustainability as a means to achieve both economic growth and cleaner supply chains?
Well, I think that in all these supply chains, again, as we look at particularly in the chemical industry, the innovation that we have is to make things lighter. If you look at just the science of something as basic as a water bottle, think of the water bottles you pick up today. This is unfortunately pretty poor science right here, but most of the water bottles you pick up today, they feel like they're almost going to fall apart. The water bottle today contains about 15% of the material that the same application did 10 years ago. That's innovation. It's making the industry more efficient, it's lowering the costs, and it's better for the environment. And if you apply that same technology into lightweighting of an EV, you're going to extend the mileage of a plane, you're going to extend the mileage and the fuel consumption. Long-range power cable, high-voltage power cables, again, being able to lighten that, being able to increase the capacity of that, depending on the insulative materials that are built into that cable. It's all about science and it's all about innovation. I would just note that when we talk about the battery and the materials that make all of this stuff, how much of that is actually being built and made and produced here in the United States? That's something that I think maybe it's for a topic some other day, but we import a lot of raw materials, especially in the mineral side and the copper side and all this, from foreign powers and from foreign entities. And so when we talk about the battery build out, we talk about the long-term cable construction, so forth, a lot of this is going to require more construction, more permitting here in the United States if we really want to domesticate and we really want to take advantage of this build out. We ought to be building these raw materials in the U.S. as well.
But if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying for every widget that Huntsman Chemical produces or every widget that someone else produces using Huntsman Chemical products, something like this, for example, I will never look at these anymore without thinking poor science. If you're able to innovate, you can produce the same number of widgets or even more widgets with fewer environmental impacts, including fewer emissions through technological innovation. Do I understand you correctly?
I believe our industry does that as well as anybody, if not better.
Mr. Tench, arguably the primary industry that the issue that your industry contends with involves the availability of reliable power. According to some reports, there's some utilities told data center developers that additional power to fuel data centers can take up to a decade to deliver. Obviously, that can be unsatisfying in that industry, which needs to be nimble and move quickly. What barriers exist within traditional utility business models to deploying large data centers at scale?
I'm not an expert on the underlying business model for most of these utilities. What I can describe is what I observe and the interactions that we have, and that is that when we begin our planning cycle, we will submit applications for engineering studies, which can take a year. They are then coupled with other developers that are looking to do similar things, and in some cases, we are all attempting to serve the same load requirement. So the utilities do have a difficult job in sifting through 10 requests that may be for actually 2 projects that ultimately go live. Their response to that has been to require very significant financial commitments to even undertake the engineering studies, and again, those take a long time. The need that we have is speed and certainty as it relates to that power, and as in our observation over the last 5 years across the country, those two factors are moving in the opposite direction.
So existing challenges coupled with the urgent need for permitting and regulatory reform sort of manifest to us a problem. We're on the kind of the knife edge of a problem, which if we move in the right direction can help bring about needed reform quickly, and it can go the opposite direction quickly. And then finally, I want to just make a point in response to some of the comments that we've had so far, to put some of the comments in context. As the Wall Street Journal pointed out earlier this week, quote, IRA, meaning the Inflation Reduction Act, turbocharged subsidies for wind and solar. And those subsidies are distorting energy investment because the subsidies can offset more than 50% of the project's costs. It's a significant amount that ends up being borne by the U.S. government and the U.S. taxpayer. Now, the claim that these tax credits reduce electric rates is, I think, contradicted, certainly undermined by experience. Wind and solar credits must be backed by peaker gas plants or batteries, which cost more than 3 times as much as baseload power. So the problem is not that there's anything inherently wrong with wind and solar being used to generate electricity. As I said earlier, they have their place. There are things that they can do. But baseload power is not something that they produce. And when you need baseload power, nothing else will do, and those don't provide that. Senator Heinrich.
I just want to make the point that in my own experience, because the thing I find most intuitive is to look at the power in my own grid and to ask the question, does what people are representing line up with actual reality? On my grid, we're only 5% coal now, and that's because coal's really freaking expensive. We're 23% gas and declining, but that's very useful generation. It's hard to add to because you can't get a turbine. We're 7% nuclear, which is great. It's firm, it's base load. If people like those terms, I prefer capacity factors, and it's got a really good capacity factor, but it's really expensive, really expensive. And then we're 35% solar, 15% wind, and with just 15% battery storage and a little bit of geothermal, we're able to balance all of that with incredible reliability, and consumers will not compromise on reliability. But most importantly, they also like low cost. And in most of the country, the average, you're paying 17 and change cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. In my grid, we're paying about 10.8 to be precise. So it is bringing the price pressure down, and it is providing the cheapest new sources of generation to replace the older, more expensive sources of generation. One of the things we have to deal with here is these agencies and the role that they play in permitting new generation and transmission. So, Mr. Gramlich, if our permitting agencies, for example, the Department of Interior, which has added this new level of red tape, stall or slow walk permits for generation projects, which we're currently seeing, and those permit projects, as a result, don't get on the grid or they get on the grid slower, what's the impact to people who pay retail electric prices?
Sure. Well, obviously that will raise prices. And what's happening is, love it or hate it, many utilities with their state regulators have put in place plans for the next few years how they're going to meet load. There might be retirements, there might be load growth. They routinely go through these plans, and just the reality is it's largely wind, solar, and storage that are in those plans.
About 95% in most cases.
To meet next load. So
if you take that 95% out, even some portion of it, say a third, what are you going to replace it with in year 1, 2, or 3? Nothing.
curtailment.
Curtailment, exactly. Why I say capacity factors is because I'm an engineer and I don't remember a lot of the terms, the buzzwords that we get thrown at around a lot here now: firm, base load, dispatchable. What I remember from my education is capacity factors, right? And if you look at generation today, I have wind in my state that has a 40% capacity factor. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. You know what else has a 40% capacity factor, Mr. Gramlich?
The gas?
Coal today in the United States of America. Everybody says it's firm and base load, and it's not. It's not because it's expensive and it's unreliable. And when you have a coal-fired generating station go down, the whole thing goes down. It doesn't go down 3%, it doesn't go down 10%. You lose that generation until that thermal plant is back up and running. So in your testimony, you talked about the increase in demand over time. DOE also is predicting a similar amount, about 2% a year. But they're also claiming that there is somehow a 100-fold increased risk of outage, and this relates to the capacity factor issue, if forecasted retirements occur between now and 2030 as predicted. What were the assumptions that went into that, that were baked into that claim?
Yeah, I think the Department of Energy, they provided useful analysis with this report, but I think they vastly overstated the retirements of generation. And as I said earlier, we have processes, either through utility planning or markets.
And markets.
Right, to discourage or prevent retirements, and that's happening. But also on the supply addition side, there's a lot more generation out there that could come onto the grid, and I think the Department of Energy study understated that new supply. So if you understate supply, overstate retirements, suddenly you have a reliability crisis, but it might just be manufactured by those numbers.
Yeah, we certainly haven't seen that in New Mexico, and we haven't seen that next door in Texas, where they have a totally separate grid from ours, but they're bringing on lots of new sources of generation, lots of new solar and batteries in particular. Transmission lines are such an important piece of all this because they do help us wheel power around the country. And it's hard to build transmission. It's why we need to actually do permitting reform, which this committee did last Congress but hasn't done this Congress yet. I worked on one transmission line for 17 years of my life, and today it has facilitated, tens of billions of dollars of economic output. It's facilitated the largest renewable project in the continent's history, but it wasn't easy to get that done. If you create a system where the politics can change overnight, where, for example, a loan from the Loan Program Office can be decided by politics rather than by metrics, what is the impact of that on reliability and on price pressure?
Well, so many utilities have testified before this committee over the years about the need for stability. They're making 60-year investments, 60, and if the policies change 180 degrees every 4 years, they simply can't do that. So I think your point is well taken. We need some stability. I do think FERC is a great place for a lot of these orders as a bipartisan, nonpartisan agency for permitting. They could do more in that regard, but we need to get that regulatory stability for investment.
Thank you.
Senator Justice. We'll go to Senator Justice, then Senator Cantwell, then Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, guys, we got some really smart folks up here. There's no question about that. And I'm sure that y'all are super smart, and I'm very proud of your contribution to this great country in every way. And I really thank everybody out here in the audience and everything. I know you've got family and everything, and congratulate everybody for being here. Let me just ask you simply this, or make this statement. Why do we continue to make this so much harder than it is? Really and truly, I'm from West Virginia, and I'm a new kid on the block, and I got a lot of white hair and everything, but I was the governor of the great state of West Virginia for 8 years and everything, and We did it with logic and reason and businessmen or businesswomen approaches and everything. And all of a sudden, we took a state that was flat dead on its back any way you can cut it to prospering like you can't imagine in no time. We know in the energy sector today that a year from now or a year and a half from now, we're going to hit the wall like nobody's business. That's all there is to it. We know that. And we absolutely know the contribution of fossil fuels. And if we had carried on and gone down the pathway of some that would say, we want rid of all of it. Coal is the nastiest, terrible, most terrible word in the dictionary. And so with all that being said, we want rid of all of it. And what would have happened? Here's exactly what would have happened. You know, and there's no point in dancing around it. We would absolutely be deciding between homes and industry or homes and jobs because we couldn't do them both. There's no way. And you know it. We all know it. All of y'all know it. So why don't we get at trying to do something that is the right thing? We know what the problem is. My dad would have told me 10 million times, son, you got to first know how deep you are in the hole, but when you know the position you are in the hole, then we can try to get out of the hole. He would have also said, for God's sakes a living, I don't care how hard you try, don't confuse effort with accomplishment. Now, we got to achieve right now. That's all there is to it. So I would just ask you just this, and this is the simplest thing I could possibly ask you. We all know we've got to have reliable. We know we have to have a regulatory climate that we can function. I mean, for God's sakes, we know all the answers. Why don't we just get at fixing the problem? But my question is just simply just this. From the standpoint of, can you talk about the dangers of retiring all fossil fuels, whether it be gas or coal or whatever? Can you talk about where we would be in this country today if we just decided, okay, that's what we're going to try to do? Because I do know this, West Virginia, 83% of the power in West Virginia comes from coal. I do know there are states out there that don't derive a lot of power from coal. I was the guy that said, embrace all, but for God's sakes a living, let's quit subsidizing one and making it unfair against the others. If it's not fair, let's quit doing it. You know, so talk to us about just what I just asked. Talk to us, please, and just go very quickly because I've only got a minute left.
National suicide.
I love it. And I'll tell you this. I was going to say this before we started. I love, and I don't know Peter Huntsman at all, but I love your bluntness, gosh almighty, because that's exactly what we need. We don't need to quit. We need to quit dancing around the ring around the rainbow. We need to absolutely do it. Now, go ahead, sir.
Look, we're at the edge right now in terms of having the power we need. We're going to be running short. We need to preserve and add resources everywhere we can.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, your state's very different in its preferences than neighboring states, and that's a good reason why states are largely in charge of generation choices and portfolios. So I don't think the federal government needs to be meddling right now in specific power plants. Let's leave that to the states.
Well, would we not all say, if we were all being really smart, we have a situation that could become a national security situation, and it's right at our doorstep. Would we not all say, for God's sakes a living, why in the world don't we just look at what countries of the world are trying to do right today? China's building a coal-fired power plant every day, you know, and I'm exaggerating to make my point, but they're not doing it just because for fun. I mean, they know how absolutely important power is. So, nevertheless, I thank you for being here. Mr. Chairman, I defer.
Thank you. Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, gentlemen. I like the subject of affordable electricity. It's kind of built the state of Washington over and over again. And so we've had a pretty robust conversation now with all of my colleagues here from different parts of the United States about how to get there. Haven't heard the word fusion yet. Certainly believe that while we're talking about transmission capacity and various sources of energy, the United States continuing to be a leader in breakthrough technology is also a key component, very important to the equation. Maybe somebody wants to address that. But I did, Mr. Huntsman, want to talk about the need for more electricity in the AI revolution, and particularly this issue you are talking about, the large amounts of composite material. I really did want to follow Senator Cassidy because it was a good lead-up, being from the state of Washington and aerospace and the transformation that we want to see in aerospace with larger percentages of composite materials. But won't we be able to create some efficiencies by using AI and then making it more efficient in the development of these very lightweight materials, but also intensity in what it takes to actually produce them? Won't there be a feedback loop here that will help us?
Absolutely, Senator. You're spot on correct in that if you use the sciences of material sciences to lightweight anything, it's just a simple law of physics. You're going to require less energy to move that product, whether move that end item, whether it's an automobile or whether it's an airplane. And yes, AI is going to greatly facilitate the design, specifications, and the raw material usage to do these. What we also need to make sure is that we have a permitting process in place. If AI can tell us that we can make this new product, and we've got the capability of altering our manufacturing footprint to make it tomorrow, I may have to wait 3 to 5 years for the EPA to approve a new chemistry. And that's simply not acceptable when you look at what we're doing with AI and what we're doing with material sciences. So you're spot on.
Okay, so how do we accelerate that then?
Well, it'd be great if the EPA would follow the laws that all of you passed creating TSCA, which is they have 90 days to approve a product or not. Right now, we have products that have been waiting for 3 to 4 years to get approval. I can build a facility in China in less time than that. If you're going to be building these composite materials, you're better off going someplace other than the United States because it takes so long.
We don't want that. We have a world demand for 40,000 airplanes right now.
That's right.
We are about to go to a major transformation where instead of building 40 planes a month, you'll be able to build 100 planes a month. Oh, but wait, only if you get this next phase of composite manufacturing or thermoplastics right.
We're ready to go.
And so we want to see that. We want to see it particularly related to AI and large-scale parts of the airplane. Obviously, you articulated very well in your earlier testimony how much the current manufacturing prowess has given us some percentage, 18 to 20, maybe even higher percentage of an airplane now with these lightweight materials. But the big move now is you can build bigger pieces, and obviously instead of taking hours to bake in an autoclave, you can do them in a large-scale press. And so that's the thing in front of us. I was thinking a little more. Yes, TSCA, but a little more about what agencies or what other people do you think we need to get involved to get people to understand that AI, we went to one of our national labs and we're just seeing some testing that was done that might have been done in the past by individuals, very repetitive formulated process, very time consuming, very boring, probably would have taken, maybe years, but certainly months. But it was AI and automated and they just ran 24/7. And so they're going to get that chemical analysis done in a few months instead. That's what AI is helping us to deliver. So how can we communicate this in a broader way that we get more people understanding what the opportunity is?
Well, I think if you make it applicable to the average person, for example, in cancer research, if you're able to apply AI, what if your cancer outcomes for cancer medications were to improve multiple fold? What if your prices of your groceries and so forth, because of growing seasons and so forth in AI, what if that were to improve? I think you need to be able to, there's such a fear of AI taking my job. That needs to be supplanted with the idea that every technological advancements we've had in modern industry has benefited larger society. AI will do likewise. We need to do a better job selling that, both at a federal level and a state level and at an industrial level.
I know my time's up, but fusion, good idea to make sure we're making progress, right?
I would say absolutely. That's an exciting opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So you all need a lot of power for your AI. How are we going to get more base load on the grid? We keep adding variable rate sources, and that is creating grid instability. You all want to use a lot of power off the grid. And when Chairman Lee turns his lights on and the lights don't come on, or he turns his air conditioning on in a hot day in Utah and it doesn't work because you're sucking all the power out of the grid and we're having blackouts and brownouts, he's going to be really unhappy, and he's got quite a temper. So how are you going to get enough base load out there to make sure that you not only can do all your great AI stuff, which you've been talking about, but we keep, the power on for all our consumers that need it 24/7. And you can go in any order you want, but I'd like to get your opinions on it.
Happy to start. Look, I think what we've been talking about in the hearing is about ways in which we can ensure that we can gain access to the electrons that are already on the grid through greater levels of interconnection, enhancement to the intelligence of the grid itself, so that it can be more adaptive to load changes that are occurring, and again, use better the generation and transmission infrastructure that we already have. That said, it's not enough, and our position is we need to encourage as much new generation of whatever type as we can, including nuclear, including geothermal, et cetera.
Right, but if you don't balance it out, you're going to have instability, you're going to have blackouts. If you just keep adding wind power or other variable sources, you're going to have problems. And it seems to me there's a lot of people who want to take coal off the grid, and there's a lot of people that seem to have phobia about nuclear. And a lot of people don't want to allow any transmission or any of those kind of things to be built. How are you going to break through that and get this done? Because y'all are bringing on a big-time demand for power at a high rate. And at some point, everybody kind of wants to go on like everything's going to be just fine and they're going to have all their power, and not kind of get the idea that we're going to have to do some of these things. How are you going to crack this mindset so people kind of put their shoulder to the wheel and say, yeah, we need all these things?
Well, hopefully, hearings like this, where we're helping to inform folks like yourselves who are in a position to influence regulation, and the other agencies that are involved in this will help. But if we can agree that the ability for the United States to be dominant in AI technology is a matter of national security, which I think it is, hopefully that will rally folks around us applying our influence, our pressure, in our case, our capital, towards incremental sources of generation and transmission.
Simple fact.
Let me add one more thing before you, both the others, give me some thoughts. But look, nuclear is going to take some time, and we're going to have to change the way we build it to practically build it at some reasonable cost and a reasonable time frame, which obviously we're trying to do. Chris, right, and everybody's trying to do it. And we're going to need to keep baseload coal around, for a lot longer. So we're going to have to start putting some of these things together. How do we do that? I mean, it's not just telling our chairman about it. I mean, somehow we got to get folks to really understand and buy into this program if you guys are going to get the power that you want for AI. Because a lot of folks see the potential of AI, but a lot of folks aren't all that thrilled about it.
I'm not an AI producer. I'm from the chemical industry. But if I've got $1 trillion balance sheet, I'm always going to be able to afford the power. That's not a concern to me. If he's got $1 billion balance sheet, he comes behind me. And if he's got a $1,000 balance sheet like the average household in America, guess who's going to pay the highest price, and guess who's going to get the incremental last bit of electricity? And that's the way it's going to work. It's a pyramid. And so if you can afford it, and what we need to be doing is, you're absolutely right, we need to be building out the base load power, which has got to come back to natural gas. That's going to be the cleanest, it's the fastest, it's the most economical means of having a reliable base load across the board. And that's from our industry, because we don't have $1 trillion balance sheet. We've been through Europe, we've been through all these continents that have tried 7 different ways of making electrons, and they're virtually bankrupt. Doesn't work. We know it. It's not a theory. Doesn't work.
That was a really exactly what I'm getting at. I think folks got to hear what you just said. Because that's going to be meaningful to them. You know, that was very good. And, sir, any thoughts you would have?
Well, I would just say we've heard a lot today about a balanced, diverse portfolio, and the power system's more like a basketball team. The point guard doesn't do what the center does and vice versa, and you need it all. And particularly in this moment of rapidly rising load growth, we can't be taking one of those players off the court.
Yeah, I mean, I just think folks need to understand what we have to do here. And I think how you all communicate that, how we all communicate really matters because we got to get going. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Hoeven. Just to wrap up, I want to push back a little on some of my colleagues' claims that renewable generation paired with batteries is somehow significantly cheaper and more reliable. It's just not borne out by the data. The renewables and storage have a significant scalability issue. Backup power is required and it's needed whenever you have renewables and storage operating as a significant leg of the energy stool, because it happens from time to time when they don't perform adequately up to the task when demand peaks. Now, this is especially true whereas is bound to happen with some frequency. Demand peaks for a period of time longer than 4 hours. 4 hours matters because that's about the capacity of utility scale batteries to hold power. So you're inevitably going to have times when the wind, the sun, some combination of the two aren't doing what they need to do when demand peaks. And in those moments, you've got to have something to back it up. Then additionally, if we want to cherry pick data, let's look at some of the electric power costs in different parts of the country. Louisiana's retail cost of electricity is lower than, say, New Mexico's, and its electricity mix is 76% gas and 3% renewables. Utah's retail cost of electricity currently stands at around 9 cents per kilowatt hour, and statewide the grid runs on 77% coal and gas-fired generation. And more specifically, my local utility also has low retail rates, about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and runs on roughly 60% gas and coal. So renewables and storage have a place. They're capable of helping do their part to make the grid more resilient and reliable. But scalability is an issue. We cannot forget the need for backup generating capacity. And if we're going to have two grids to accommodate all that, it's going to get a lot more expensive, and that in turn drives a lot of the potential for our competitiveness, a lot of the demand for these things outside the United States, and we don't want to lose that race. This has been a great hearing, and I want to thank each of you for being here and for your testimony. All three of you have offered phenomenal insights, and I'm grateful for the participation of my colleagues as well, who've made some great points. This will wrap up today's hearing. The deadline for submitting questions for the record, any senator who wants to do that must do so no later than 6 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday, the 24th of July. Senators will also have until 6 p.m. this coming Wednesday, July 30th, to add statements for the record to today's hearing. Thanks again to our witnesses and to all of you who participated. The committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you next week. Thank you.